Good. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Oh,
I listened to the podcast you did the other day. It was really interesting. Thanks for that.
oh, okay. Thank you. So you're one step ahead of me. Perfect. Sorry, I didn't get the chance to catch up on your podcast. Oh, damn it.
Ah,
Ah,
so we're even now. I missed out on Zoom and you missed out on my podcast. So it's 1-1.
So even. Oh, great. But Mustafa brought us together to talk today about
Yeah,
technology,
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. So this all
I was.
started with metadata, right? Metadata, and metadata. And Daniel is my guy for metadata for last 3, 4 years, Daniel, around 4 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we had a session on this one. Then we went towards metagraph, and then Tim came into the picture and he explained the semantic, product, which also touch base metagraph and all those kind of stuff. So that is where this whole connection comes in, and we
Hmm?
wanted to have this kind of triangle session where I would love to hear from both of you how it goes, understand more on
Yep.
these graphs and metadata. So okay, I think floor is open. So who is going to start? Tim, you're going to start.
Oh, I'm going to say yeah, as Mustafa said, he mentioned the concept of metagraphs
Hmm?
in our previous session, and I was like, I haven't heard of the term before, and Mustafa was so open-minded, like, hey, you should definitely meet Daniel because he is the owner of the topic metagraphs, and he is probably the best person to explain it to you. So perfect. I thought like we do it in a one-on-one, but now we do it in the podcast. Perfect.
It's
Learning.
it's even better.
Yeah, before we jump into it, right, let me bring this graph theory as well. Because Francisco, Daniel, and Tim, you might know about Francisco Papini, right? So he also introduced this graph theory to me. And then when I went into it, last my couple of articles are onto it, I started investigating and researching on it, and it blows up my mind. And it is all about the same thing, ontology and taxonomies and graph, the metagraph, all those kind of things, right? So graph, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just throwing this idea onto the floor, Daniel. So this graph theory works on metagraph, ontology, and taxonomies, and you create using these three terms. Graph theory uses and creates the data model, which is end of the whole story. Am I right in the right direction?
Yes, you're absolutely in the right direction. It's about, I mean, at its core, it's about a good, accurate representation of the information in your organization. And that needs structure, it needs relations, it needs ways of structuring, storing knowledge. And all of that is a multidimensional world. It's not two-dimensional. It's not just an Excel sheet with an X and Y axis. It is multidimensional. And that's the core of it. And that means we need tools that support us in describing reality. We do not need tools that forces us to simplify reality just because of the sake of the system limitations. That's my the core of of the metagraph and those parts.
And just to bring why this thing came in, right? So, Daniel, Tim is the inventor of this semantic data product, right? Tim, if I'm not wrong, this is the term
Yep.
you coined, right? So when
Yep.
I met him and we understood this is the whole piece, so he's also very much focused on creating a product, talking to customer directly, and
Mhm.
build it. So that is where this idea came in. I asked him, "Hey, are you working on Metagraph?" He said, "No, what is Metagraph?" I said, "Okay, let's go to Daniel and talk about it." So maybe Tim, you can give little bit hint on your semantic data product, and let's hear Daniel about what he can add on to it. Maybe it's an input for you as well for future.
Yeah. So then let me share. I think Daniel what you said is I totally agree with that because I think we had the revolution or evolution in data management where people started with enterprise data warehouses, data lakes, and but it all ended up with again silos. The aim was basically bring all the data together in one place, and then we have the ultimate reports. But in the end, and then we still have business silos there, and how the business is structured, also the technology is structured again. So Murphy's law, not Murphy's law, but the law. Um, and my approach, my discovery of basically how can we align people to speak the same language, follow the same concepts? And the idea is basically leveraging graph structures here as the underlying enabler technology or concept. And what we try to do is actually we sit together with business units, let them model their questions. Basically, we call this the concept of competency questions, concept you can Google for it. So basically, let them phrase the questions they have in mind to answer their business problems. Let this model in a graph or in an ontology, because they're using the taxonomy and how things relate to each other in an ontology. And then you sit with other business units as well and let them do the same thing. And referring back to other ontologies. So relate things to each other. So over time, this will create a bigger knowledge graph for the entire organization. So you end up like with several domains talking and start relating to each other, and they can still stay in their business language and their business models, and everything is, and they can model it in a perfect world. Then you get a knowledge graph. So that's a perfect, great thing, and people understand it, like it, can maintain it. The question is, why should they do this? Because they're spending time on something, a line of work, it brings a value. But the problem is, how do we bring that to IT? And the ideas that we had in mind is basically, okay, take this knowledge graph that it creates over time, and then we basically we provide some fundamental rules, how do you model the knowledge graph and so on. But then you're having tooling around it, which basically we could take a knowledge graph or a subset of a knowledge graph, a subgraph, load this into a tool, load some existing databases next to the tool, let the business side or the business units manage their subgraph entities completely on their own. Let them circle in the subgraphs like, this will be my data product that I would want to publish. Then we have some smart intelligence behind that that's doing the mapping, extracting it's basically merging over multiple data sources and merge that into an analytical data product. Basically, take this, throw it into another S3 bucket of whatever the output port might be, leave it there, put it on a data marketplace, let others consume this data product. This data product was built on a knowledge graph, and it will relate back to the knowledge graph. When I'm as consumer consume this data product and question what is these terms means, I can really look it up. How can I relate this term with another data product from a different domain? I can use the knowledge graph again to traverse to the graph and find the exact relations. So this is going to break down the silos quite efficiently. It will make business owners like more open to take over responsibility for data products, because this is what IT people blame me most of the time. Like, hey, we have now built data products, but no one on the business side is taking over responsibility, at least in my observations. I haven't seen all cases, but
No,
yeah.
I've seen the same. And of course, you want your subject matter expert, no matter which part of the business they reside in, you want them to own their data. That's the only way you get proper quality. Of course, you can have centralized governance of things, but data quality is often lacking when we talk about wider scope of data, when you don't have your subject matter expert who are clearly assigned, accountable, and have the ownership. If that is clear to everyone, you know who to call if there's something wrong in the data you're consuming.
Absolutely.
Just to add it here, right? The challenge which I've seen, and I've talked to Tim on this one. So Daniel, you can also comment in it. The moment you open these all relationships onto the marketplace and business are there, and Tim is allowing them to change it on the fly or based on the discussion, but it will impact the data model at backend. How do you see that challenge, and how to cater that?
Me?
You want to start, Tim?
Yeah. So I think everything is changing constantly in nowadays in our business world. Like the data model from these data sources is changing, and also business is changing constantly. And whenever you have a change on both sides, it doesn't matter, like, because like if you have a tool in the middle that is doing the mapping for you, it's basically gets a notification that the ontology was changed or the data source, the underlying data source was changed. So it has to reiterate the whole mapping process. And one thing that I haven't mentioned is quite important. The mapping process has a human in the loop feedback, because it's like reinforcement learning, yeah, I don't want to be too technical, but like it has some mechanisms where it's like, hey, I don't, if I'm unsure about the mapping process, always ask, as Daniel said, the subject matter expert, because he sits in front of a nice user interface, like, hey, yeah, this is the right mapping. So it assigns basically tasks to SMEs according to the knowledge or the unsecureness of the machine.
But then
So
then we create a dependency on that IT team, centralized IT team, which we are all trying to run away. You know, what do you think
it's
about
the
that?
way because the central IT team only has to set up this machinery once,
Hmm.
and the model basically learns based from your explanation. But this is an explanation from the SME from that domain. So you can have so many different models be trained in parallel from different domains, so that the mapping might be super accurate. It's like it's gonna reach like 99% if you give enough training to it.
Yeah. Daniel, you want to add anything? Because I'm going to put a actual business challenge now here, and I shared this idea. But before I go into it, you want to say something on it on this challenge?
Um, well, as I see it, we don't get around people. People are the core because it is, I mean, it's in the name. We're capturing knowledge. That is what we do in a knowledge graph. So it's always people's knowledge. And the challenge prior has been there's been no really good way of capturing the width of knowledge with people because you had to put it in a silo, and people's knowledge in an organization is not siloed. That's why I often encounter these people who worked in the organization 30, 40, even 50 years, and they know how to cover the white spots, the gaps in the IT and system landscape, and they act as kind of a human integration engine. They know what to clean, how to clean it, what connects to which, and so on. They know that in this system, the concept weight or the attribute weight is not the same as the attribute weight in this other system because one is describing the weight of the machine, the other one is describing the weight of the machine with the packaging and with the manuals and all of that. Even though it's the same name, these are two totally different definitions that we have. And that is the hardest part when you're trying to automate is, well, semantically, it looks the same, but they're actually homonyms. They are two words that are exactly the same but have different meanings because you need the context of the original system to describe it. And since those definitions are lacking, because in system A over here, everything's clear because as long as you only work in that system, in that silo, all sort of rules and requirements are very clear. It's when you put that in your information landscape, that is when the problem comes alive for real. And that's where humans are crucial.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So now I'll throw this challenge, right? Because when we talk about graphs, that's my confusion as well. For both of you can answer that, right? We know that centralized lakehouse, whatever you want to call it, it's dying, and we all know that enterprise is for enterprise decisions, not for enterprise usage. People are confused. They create an enterprise solution and they ask everyone to hit it. It's not going to happen. That's where federated approach comes in. Everyone need to have their own data products. And when we talk about data products and we little bit think about data mesh, a lot of people say there is no successful implementation of data mesh. But the thing is, I like the idea that if sales can own sales data products, marketing can own marketing data products. And if this marketing wants some new information from sales, sales is going to create that product, not marketing. Sales create it and marketing use it. Now, when we come towards this graph theory, I will use the word of graph theory because underneath of graph theory, we know graph, metagraph, ontology, and taxonomies, these three terms comes. So we will create this graph theory per product, or that will be centralized. Daniel, I think you can
Yeah,
take.
I can start. So when I've worked with this and implemented these capabilities, I've introduced something that's quite uncommon. I call it the structure owner. Somebody who owns sort of how do the different graphs connect together? How do the different ontologies, how do the different taxonomies, how do they link together? Which are the valid connections, and which are not valid? That, in my experience, is usually the role of an architect, an information architect, but it's highly operational. It's about connecting the knowledge, the different subgraphs, the different knowledge graphs, to connect them together in enterprise-wide model. That is essentially the digital twin of your organization we're talking about. But of course, you won't ever build that from scratch. You build it piece by piece, but you always have the mindset, how does this part connect to the whole? And that layer, that meta layer, it's a meta model. It's a model or a meta graph, depending on which perspective you want to view it, technology or conceptually. But that model is what I refer to as an operational reference model for the entire enterprise. It is the stable point which allows you to change out systems, input system, output systems, because you have a stability. But as long as you put that model on each individual system, that means when you change system, you change your data model, which means all your integrations follow and you lose a lot of knowledge. So that is a very important role, and I am advocating a lot for that role, but it does not exist in most organizations today. But if you want to be data or actually information driven, data plus context equals information. So if you want to have data with your context, you need to have someone in your organization or a function in your organization that owns that 360 view of the enterprise and how these models interlink.
So you're right. I will throw this question to you, Tim, as well, because that will relate to semantic data product, because normally semantic data product is for specific product. It's not for organization level, right? So Daniel, what you're saying is in federated approach, we are saying there has to be a centralized governance. And when we say it's centralized governance, this team which you are talking about or a role talking about need to sit there, who need to have a blueprint, I would say blueprint of this whole graph of the organization, which will of course grow piece by piece as product comes, but it has to be owned by one team, and that one team will talk to the all, for example, new product comes in. Now the question comes to you, Tim. So now when you say this graph created, right? Are you in your methodology as well, in your approach, are you also referring a single team who is managing this, or you are building your graphs for semantic data product in silo? How you are doing it?
Exactly, I would say almost the same way as Daniel described. So what we have is basically a graph is not a single piece. It has multi layers basically.
Yeah.
I think you will have a central team, as again like in data mesh, you have a central team
Yes.
which is defining the rules. But the actual building of the graph or subgraphs or domain graphs, or that's the concept of upper ontology, domain ontologies, core ontologies. So there are multiple levels there. Basically, what you need a small core, which is defining, I don't know, in a 3 to 5 node element, basically, how the organization on a highest level works together. So basically, you have customer, you have product, you have revenue or something like there could be any kind of simplest graph that everyone can align on. And then out of these, then we call it metagraph in that case. Yeah. So based on this metagraph that should be owned by, there's usually something called a data office in an organization that has at least is call themselves data driven. I wouldn't say like information driven, but data driven. Most will have something like data offices which already run the data catalog, the enterprise data catalog or so. So these teams should be already in charge of maintaining some high level vision, and then they must align with the major stakeholders. You need a major stakeholder from the C-level, otherwise it won't work out. So they've defined the highest level, and then based on this, you derive some guidelines. If you want to contribute your subgraph, your ontology into this graph, it has to follow several principles. And there are tools and technologies around it. If you want to commit something to a knowledge graph, it has to follow some shapes. Call that shape in that case. Yeah. So they completely agree with Daniel. Like you need someone that is a structure owner of this graph, this total graph or subgraphs as well. And this could be a product. I combine this usually with a product owner or the data officer or whatever terminology you might have. But in the end, there is a domain. Someone is responsible in the domain for the information, for the knowledge in this domain. And there might be even people beyond this because the domain might be too huge that own or are responsible for substructures. And usually those substructures end up in something you want to work on, that you want to share with others outside of your domain, or that you need for internal development purposes. But someone needs to be in charge and owning the structure. And this is what I see as semantic products in the end. For me, this is
exactly. And we can call it the domain owner. You have a domain owner for product or for organization. There's a domain owner, and they need help to coordinate in between. When I've set up that type of governance, we've had a change advisory board where we gathered domain owners led by a structure owner and aligning, okay, now we want to connect customer to product. Okay, what interfaces do we have and what requirements do we have to make that work? And what, when I built this up in the past, we didn't even have the term data product. So we had to make do with more practical, okay, if we combine this product and this customer, or this product and this industry together with this service, what's the output going to look like? Who's going to own the output? Who's going to own the, when you combine several domains into one set of data, who's going to own that? What's the purpose? Who's the consumer? And so on. So yeah, structure owner and domain owner are very important roles, and very often they don't exist.
Okay,
but there are prerequisites to get this to work.
A question pop up, right? When you say domain, whenever we talk about domain, people think about data mesh. And my apologies, I don't see a lot of good feedbacks on data mesh, because bringing domain owners at one place, it is kind of difficult, because in organization, people are more focused on products and they want to recover back directly from products. So we are saying, marketing need a product of sales. So sales is the owner. You have to be dependent on them. So that will become very difficult. How do you say that? Is it a limitation, or is it, I don't know, because I have talked to a lot of people and they are very much reluctant that, hey, someone want a data product. Why you want to be a dependent on this centralized body? And within the centralized body, we know every domain owner sitting there. And you know, right, big organizations, normally domain owners are reluctant to own that thing. So how do we tackle that challenge? That has to come from C-level, or how?
So one way of seeing this, based on my experience, is ownership. And I think you might have a different opinion, Tim, but ownership, the easiest way to assign ownership is asking the question, let's talk about the data product. If this data product doesn't work, has poor data quality, who in the organization is the one who will have the pain? For me, that's a very good first test in assigning ownership, because ownership for me needs to lie within the person or organization that has the pain if it doesn't work. Because if you don't have a pain when it doesn't work, no accountability or what it might be, then of course you will not maintain it. I have an example when we went live with a product taxonomy, a big product model that went across 40 different systems with the same definition and same structure. And when we went live and pushed that out without any sort of interfaces in between to the web, it was very clear there was some domain ownership, but there was also the individual ownership for each product node in that structure, and if you own the product line, and then you often owned everything beneath as well. So 3 levels down. Having that accountability, we went to a 99.9% data quality within 24 hours by exposing that. Because you had the accountability, was also clear who had the pain if the data quality was bad. And in this case, it was on product management, it was on the product owners for each product that was exposed to the web. And prior to that, they could always talk to or say, this is marketing or this is communication. They do the web. We're not accountable for what they do. Removing that sort of intermediate layer and ensuring that the people who are accountable, who own the product, are also accountable for the information. That created a huge boost of quality and a big sense of ownership for it.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I like actually the 99% of data quality is an impressive number. Great job. That seems to be like that the structure you gave already works. But before adding to this point, Mustafa's point, like people associating domains with their mesh and feeling reluctant, I think domains are all over the place. I mean, there's domain-driven design and software engineering for decades now in the field, and people love that approach of building their domains and software engineering concepts. So this is a well-adapted thing, and also domains in an organizational from how the organization is structured in business units. So like there's also domains. It's not like that's only applicable for data mesh, because it's a widely used concept of structuring something and putting smaller things that you can easily handle, like divide and conquer, is the fundamental concept here. So I see basically data mesh for me is basically the combination of domain-driven design plus data engineering principles, added with the social aspect of not scaling teams. Therefore, I like data mesh. Yeah, it wasn't successful because I think it's quite hard to implement all the aspects of data mesh, and therefore I always try to do, because how do you want to implement this in a large scale organization? You usually go in with a big bang. It's like, hey, we're going to transform the whole entire enterprise into something. That usually doesn't work. What you need is some good sponsor in the organization. So like, hey, we do the first use case with you because you understand the concepts of knowledge graphs and why they are so helpful for you. And we will provide a data product, which is way better than any kind of data set, or we will also bring a semantic data product, which has way more better description than any other data products you had before. So the problem is these data providers have the issue of like explaining hundreds of times again and again how to integrate your data with someone else's data. And this is a waste of time for the project that's doing analytics, for the product data owners, which providing the information again. So there's a lot of waste and time. There's a lot of pain already in the organization. And we go and it's like, hey, for this specific use case, we make this ontology or subgraph documentation of your product. You can really, from a business point of view, you can describe it as you would like. And then we publish this on a first initial marketplace where people then can like consume your product, but also see who owns it and how to approach the person for, I say, new requirements. Because you need probably another aspect of that product, or yeah, there's a lot of things that, so it's like go use case by use case, but you need someone from the top level sponsorship, because like what you will need is a marketplace. You need some knowledge graph or ontology management tools. You need the mapping concepts there. So there's some upfront costs, which are okay-ish, but some which usually involve higher executives to sponsor it. But then you can go use case by use case, and you can really release pain in the organization usually, because if there is no pain, as Daniel said, why should you change something if there's no pain, to be honest? I mean, we should not do it like we now have the word semantic graph, let's throw it at everyone. That doesn't make sense. Then you feel absolutely it's a waste of money and time. Yeah, and
adding to that, because I mean, as you say, I agree. Piece by piece, bit by bit, with a unified vision. I think that's when we talk about executive sponsorship. We need someone who owns the vision that yes, I do one piece of the puzzle now, but I have an idea on how the full implementation will look like in a couple of years. We're building towards that vision, and I think, yeah, as you said, Tim, or my interpretation at least, that if you look at data mesh, or if you look at data fabric, and you say, oh, it's a big bang approach. Let's solve it with one big implementation. That's when you go wrong. For me, looking at sort of where I've come from, and I mentioned the digital twin and the digital twin of an organization before, I consider that a vision. It's not something that will ever be 100% checked off. Now we have 360 coverage of our entire enterprise and all the data, because companies evolve all the time. So we'll never be at 100%, and you should never have that as your objective. You should have it as a vision that you're aspiring towards, to make sure that we have sort of architecturally sound, an architectural sound mindset when we're going there. And talking to Gartner a while back, and talking about the digital twins, we talked to them, and we got a sort of a segmentation that I think was really important. That when you talk about this sort of vision, if it's the data measure, the digital twin of an organization, if that is the vision, how do you get there? And then we started talking to them about discrete digital twins. You describe a specific domain, or even a part of a domain, or a subgraph, as you'd mentioned it. And then you combine two or more of these subdomains, or these discrete digital twins, and you build a composite digital twin. And then you combine two or more of these composite digital twins, and then you start creating your digital twin of an organization. You can apply the same mindset, I think, to a data mesh. So I mean, the concept behind the data mesh is sound. It is the approach on implementation with the data mesh, or when it comes to the data fabric, thinking it's a technology solution, not a combination of sort of people, process, technology, and data. You need to combine all these three. And if you slice parts of that out, of course it's going to end up failing, because you're not taking responsibility for the result.
You make a really crucial point, which I would like to highlight. People, process, and technology, all three aspects need to be covered in any kind of solution. Otherwise, it will fail. Because I've seen so many people just like being focused on technology and just like, hey, I have installed here, this tool XYZ. Why don't you use it?
Yeah.
Why should we? So I have seen this so many people like just being like, hey, it's now the highest and greatest technology I've seen on advertisement. It's still, you need an organization. You need to run through processes and organizations. And we were speaking about the owner of the structure. That's a process of establishing an organizational-wide role. Bring that into the mindset of people in Germany. We have quite strong workers' councils. So in Germany, like establishing a new role takes a year at least, because these councils they do not work that often. They get together only once in a quarter or every half a year, depending on the organizational structure. And you need to sign up from their side. You need to sign up from the top management. You need to establish an HR. You have to define that in HR functions, responsibilities, etc., etc. And this is a process which takes longer than installing any kind of software.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me bring the discussion back towards Metagraph actually. So Daniel, just we need your more brain over here. So Tim has been creating this semantic data product using technology, taxonomies and ontologies. Correct, Tim? Now we bring in Metagraph. How Metagraph can help and support and assist Tim to bring more visibility or creating more better solutions. It'll be good for our audience as well, because taxonomies, ontologies, everybody knows. Metagraph is something new. What value add and how it can be created.
So consider the metagraph, the framework on how you connect the different graphs. So that meta level, how do you connect graph A, B, and C together? What are the common denominators? What are the rules, as you were saying, Tim? Those are defined on that metagraph level. And if you drill down to your individual data products, for example, if you drill down to that level, whether it's a data product, whether it's a model in in your Databricks implementation, whether it's a microservice or it's a packed business capability, the thing is, you need to think about the scaling. How do I go from 10 of these to 100 to 1,000 of these and still maintain integrity? So you don't end up with a situation where you have 2 data products out of the 1,000 that sound similar, that is both presenting you with the revenue for the year, but they have slightly different data sources. They have slightly different definitions. How do you create that integrity and create the ability to scale up from a POC stage to full operations? That is the role of the metagraph, to keep that sort of together.
Oh, interesting. Is it like, do you have what immediately triggers my mind is basically taxonomy harmonization. Basically, if you have one data source, we have that in our research labs. So there's like multiple data sources. One data source talks about a company and talks about the revenue of, let's say, 1 billion. And then you have another data source that talks about the same company, completely different spelled, but talks about a 500 million revenue. How can you merge those both informations? That's the same company, the same entity resolution thing. And how can you provide the end user with there's a standard deviation? You have 2 data sources because you don't want to lose the information over time. And this is quite interesting because we're working on this in an M&A context, basically. Whenever you have, well, either M&A, like how do you judge if the asset you really want to buy, or if your own organization got extended from an external data supplier. Can you there elaborate a bit more, like how do you do that, and if I'm on the right path, or
You're absolutely on the right path, and I mean I mentioned the product taxonomy. Let's use that as an example. That, for example, you sell products, and on your website you describe them on a certain level. You describe it on quite a high level. That this is the product in general. This is what it's used for. These are the industries, and so on. Then you can go down to more of a, if you call that the commercial domain, you can go down to a more engineering domain and say, well, this is the bill of materials to produce this. This is the bill of process, how to produce these things. All of this describes the same thing, but on different abstraction levels. That is the taxonomy part of it. But a taxonomy does not have to reside only in one system. That taxonomy can reside over many different systems. So it is creating a common product model across many systems, once again, that operational level. So when it comes to an organization, you can see, well, it's got different spelling. Is it that this is actually a subsidiary of the 1 billion company? Is that a subsidiary that has a 500 million revenue or not? You have to describe the organizational relations and the different abstractions. Subsidiary, it can be a partner company, it can be a sales company, but you need to describe that in a way that is independent on individual data sources or systems, and then capturing that knowledge, because you have people in the organization who knows this and says, well, if I'm getting data from this source, it's always the subsidiaries. Whereas when I'm getting data from this source, it's always the mother company. And that is sort of the graph of graphs, the metagraph, how to describe and capture those rules. So in reflection to your you can start with five different entities or domains. When we built these metagraphs, they often end up having a couple of thousand to 15,000, 20,000 entities that are described, but they are common across the enterprise, but they can be on different abstraction levels. So that is also the role of the metagraph in what you're describing, to provide something that goes beyond and across your system landscape.
Which is quite interesting, because let's say you have the case of an M&A and you want to have a data product. It's like, hey, let's talk about our complete customer base. Like if you talk directly to the graph, the underlying systems can really change. As long as you create the knowledge graph, the information structure you have, it's a completely abstraction layer of the actual system of records. And
Yeah.
there you get a lot of benefits because people like that consume that information, they don't have to talk or care anymore. Like you can add these informations, you have the taxonomy harmonization, everything is there done for you, and you can still have these enterprise-wide dashboards talking about the same thing. You get a constant reporting and you get a reliable information that allows you to make a good decision making.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Sounds great, doesn't it?
It sounds. It reminds me completely on what I have envisioned for the semantic data products because this is the same concept. I think there we're getting really close to each other, and we definitely need to align this somehow. Not sure where, but there follow-ups, not here publicly.
Yeah, absolutely a follow-up. I'm very curious to see how these things align, because I think we see the same thing here, Tim.
So I have a follow-up question over here from data modeling perspective, right? So we end up creating all these. We have 16 minutes, right? We have a time check. So what we are saying is we create graphs. Graphs have taxonomies and ontologies and meta, all those things. We have visually all those link charts created, right? Now, at a backend level, database level, how you guys want to store it. Just like graph theory says, look into this graphs. Every node and relationship have its own entity, its own attributes and weight and structure. Based on that, go and create the data model. So when we're talking about create a data model, are we talking about data model for data preparation, which can be data vault, which can be 3NF, which can be anything, or we are talking about data model in semantic layer, which is very near to the business. So Power BI can hit it and see how we are exposing the data, because these graphs are just graphs. Is data sitting inside the graph or data is still sitting inside the tables? I'm just very, maybe it's kind of a stupid question for you guys, but I really want to go at a bottom level where actually data, how you see that data.
I
I
can
would,
start.
okay,
No,
then I
you
bring
go,
my
Tim.
complexity. No,
You go,
please go
Tim.
because I want to add more complexity to that.
Okay, then I'll try to simplify, and then you'll add complexity, Tim. So uh, when you talk about data and the data models, the data model is a construct to solve the problem in an individual system. Okay, if we just agree that this is the purpose why you create the data model, then you have a different problem that says, well, I want to use the data based on the data model in this system for other purposes in a bigger ecosystem of information or data. How to work with that? And for me, that is kind of the answer to the question, and why I prefer to work with the metadata is that I cannot change what is in the individual system. The only thing I know is that data and those data models will change over time. So how do I create stability to create a standardized, harmonized, performant data flow in the organization? And that's why I work with metadata and why I work with the metagraph, because I don't want to bother about fixing things that cannot be fixed. I want to work with things that are actually you can influence and are sustainable over time.
Before you jump into Tim, Daniel, another follow-up question. So what you're saying is this graph that you're saying, this will define the data model of OLTP also, or only OLAP world? Two different things, because
Yeah,
graph represents your business and your OLTP applications are also hosting data for business, which is coming from the live applications. Will this OLTP will also be following these graphs?
there are different approaches, I would say. There is no simple answer to that. So now I'm leaning towards Tim's sort of increase the complexity. Because you don't want to create unnecessary layers of complexity in your information landscape. If everything is clear and everything is well defined, there's no point in adding extra complexity. And it's about the maturity. I have worked with companies that are very early on in this interface that don't have any common definitions across systems. They don't have common identifiers on attributes or products or what it might be. Then there's a need to sort of add context to the data before you expose it. But if you are able to influence at the implementation of a system that you're using the same terminology, the same semantics when you implement that system, then you can integrate directly to that system. So it's different questions depending on where you are on the maturity. If you're coming from scratch, you need to provide and add that context to every data because systems do not provide structure or definitions in their integration interfaces.
So answer to that is, as if you are starting an organization from scratch, yes, creating graphs upfront is better. So even your applications and OLTP system can follow that, but that's not going to happen. Nothing is scratch. People already have the out-of-the-box products. So I think we are more focused for this whole graph thingy we are talking about on OLAP systems, where we have to prepare data. Now, Tim, your turn to add complexity.
Before you start, Tim, I do want to add one thing that, as I said, if this is a vision, as you start implementing piece by piece, whenever you add a new system, the models that you have created will and should influence how you implement and select your new system. It needs to be able to follow what you've created and work with that. If not, then you're doing a lot of redundant work and you will never finish. So there's a solution architecture mindset coming into this when you start the journey. Sorry about your interjection.
The new solution means new data product, and data product is for serving, correct?
It can actually be the same data product. If you do your implementation proper, then the new system will automatically fit into whatever data product you have.
Correct.
You should create stability. You should create that stability so you can change your systems without breaking your products.
Now I won't say anything. Tim, we'll let you talk. Sorry.
I'll just really like what Daniel said, because like you need the stability anchor somewhere. And the graph or the knowledge graph can be your anchor because the systems of records changing over time, the process is changing, everything else changes, but there needs to be some stability. Enterprise architects say they referring usually to capabilities here, like the capability is quite stable, but also the information is there quite stable. The capability and the information should be stabilized because you need information and capabilities to do something in a business world. But not probably complexity, but like I would add up like you should store the data as you would like to read it. There are cases where you have IoT data that is made for time series data. Don't store it in a graph. Don't do that. Because there are simply time series databases which handle this perfectly because it will not scale in a graph. You have now LLMs, everything has to be vectorized. Okay, put that prompt into a vector database. Or you need something which is more on a graph rag systems where you need accurate answers, not only because similarity vectors is similar, but not reflecting the actual concepts and structures of the company. They need graph structures. So the thing is, you should store the data. Should store this data as you would like to read it. Therefore, you need some stable anchor, as Daniel just described, which can be the output, the source for everything of your use cases. So the graph stores the information, the metadata, not the actual data, and based on the information you have, you can route this basically from the data source that can be OLTP, and route this based on your requirements into an OLAP system and a graph system and a time series system, but it's based on your central knowledge. So I would say like it doesn't matter if it's their third normal form or if it's a snowflake or whatever. It's not important. It's about the information you have, the use case you have, do you like to process the information or access the information, and then basically giving your engineering world, the solution architects, the capabilities of routing this information to the systems which make use of it, and then you in the end have track where this information is coming from, where it's heading to, where it was used for. And that you need to stay on top of. So hopefully didn't make it too complex, but
no, it's perfect, right? Yeah, it's perfect because I'm a solution architect, right? So I need to look into it end to end. So what we are saying here is Once we end up creating this all graphs, it can be any knowledge graph or graph theory, and then we create a data model at at low level, at ground level, where people can really talk about data. But what data is sitting here is based on these graphs which we have created. And it can be now data preparation can be 3NF, Bill and Mon, or Ralph Campbell, of Data Vault, whatever it can be. But it has to follow the same standards which have been, or same relationships which has been defined to the graphs. Am
Yeah.
I
So
correct?
yeah, I would rephrase it differently, but yes, yeah, I think in general you're correct. Basically, I think you as an organization have modeled how you think as an enterprise. And if you buy, I don't know, an SAP product or whatever, they think differently in the end, but you need to get this data out of this SAP or whatever system into your business thinking. And there, a graph is a stable thing how that represents your thinking. It can take the data from the other data source and transform it or map it with other systems, and it will fit again into your taxonomy, into your thinking, your structures, in this whole ontology aspects. And this helps then in the later stage other systems to consume it because basically just I learned this from another talk that I have visited. Someone said like, hey, a system is nothing else than a function. And if you're concatenating a lot of functions, what you need to know is basically the input and the output port. And if you see this as a concatenation of functions, this is quite important that you know that you have stable data formats that you can assign to different inputs and output ports later on. Because if you think two steps further down the road, there will be multi-agent systems in organizations doing several work. I don't want to open this topic right now because only 5 minutes left, but these
Yeah, yeah.
multi-agent systems, these agents will be basically these systems that will concatenate functions that we haven't concatenated before. Because before that, we have had some software engineers writing pipelines or API integrations or whatever between A and B, but the agents will be able to concatenate any kind of system in your environment. Therefore, they definitely need to know what is this data about, what does this agent expect of kind of data, and they can automatically generate the thing for you. So if you want to be as an enterprise in the agentic world in the future, you should definitely be aware of what you have in your organization, and as we would like to be as the organization, because this ontology will represent your individual organization. Therefore, there's nothing off the shelf. Your company will have different knowledge graph than any other. Full
Yeah,
stop.
it's always built specifically for you. You cannot buy it off the shelf. It's impossible. And big software, big software is not designed actually to scale your individual business. The models there are designed to scale that software. And that for me is a very important understanding that the models that you have in the system, they come with the system. You cannot change them much. They are designed to be flexible enough to be able to scale the system that you're buying. It is not designed to be custom made for your individual enterprise. You cannot expect that coming from your vendors. You need to own that yourself. And I think you need to prepare for a sort of an ecosystem of solutions where you have your standard solutions. On top of that, you have your best of breed solutions. And on top of that, you have your custom built solutions. And these need to work together. That monolithic approach and do the standard approach and then configure that for everything, I don't believe in that. I don't think that is the way forward, based on the pure fact that the data model the system comes with is not designed for your enterprise. And thus, it will not scale with you.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left. I have one last question. I will give you guys 60 odd seconds each to answer that. If we can't cover it, I will cut it later. Don't worry. What is an enterprise? So there are organizations who have more than one entities. Take an example of Unilever. Hundreds of entities are underneath. So when we are creating this whole graph things, it is for each entity or across entities. When I say each entity, bank is one bank, right? But the group level might have some other businesses as well. So we are talking about each entity as an enterprise or across.
I
Do you
think you
want to
stay.
start, Tim?
Yeah. I think you should stay with one entity because if you do it for the whole group level, it will add up so much complexity that It would be perfect to have that in an ultimate goal. Is it realistic? I have my doubts. So I would stay within in on a group. If you talk like Unilever or Siemens or whatever, like these huge, gigantic enterprises that fulfill any kind of delivery you can imagine, make silos, make domains, not silos, make domains. Again, domains are well suited for this problem. I would start on a domain, and then if you have really multiple domains really on a level, then you find information architects or groups or domains that can really aggregate this somehow.
Before you jump into it, let me add, when you say domain, because if an organization, Unilever has 10 companies, every company has a sales department, every company has a marketing. Are we saying we should group all those sales as one domain, which should serve all entities, or every entity should have their own domain?
This is quite context sensitive, this answer. There will be, I think, if we have a bigger group, there will be basically groups where the sales departments of each and every domain or entity will come together like, hey, we have some on the group level, some thought exchange around this topic. And there will be similarities and same processes and concepts, but there will be much deviation because something is on a really industrial context and something is a B2C context. So there's the definition of a customer is quite
But
differentiated.
my challenge is same thing. If you bring at a domain level and multiple entities use this, how to recover the cost? Because all data is coming into unified. Daniel, we are already 7 o'clock, but let's take a couple of minutes if you want. Yeah.
It's okay. And I think it's a question of time. I don't think, as we've talked about, take it piece by piece. When you come from a group level like Unilever or similar, you cannot take piece by piece because a piece is too big.
Yes.
Talking about the value offer a product across hundreds of different brands, it's a very big piece. But if you focus on one brand, you solve it there. But still, the mindset is towards that we will have one way of describing our value offer. Then we'll get more and more specific in our taxonomy as we go down. But we start to say we have value offer. A value offer has certain capabilities or aspects that we want to capture. And then you go down and say, well, if I'm selling B2B or B2C, here's a difference. And then you drill down further and say, this is an industrial product or this is a processing product. Then you drill down further. But if you have the mindset in that you're going to build this enterprise-wide model, then you can solve it piece by piece. I don't think you should let go of that. Even though it's hard, you have to slice it piece by piece and take the first puzzle piece, but still keep your eye on the target that we want to align and get that sort of economy of scale. I've done a similar thing. We've actually having that model in place. I worked with a company. They acquired a 2,500 employee company, and they wanted to integrate their product portfolio into the core portfolio. It took us 2.5 days to get that work done since we had a well-defined model. And after 2.5 days, then there was a weekend. So on the Monday thereafter, we went live with that entire product portfolio from a 2,500 people company, went live with that in their CRM system, in their PLM system, in ServiceNow, issue management system, on e-business, on public web, all of those, because that stable reference, then it was really fast to integrate.
Okay, so just a conclusion. So we all agree that build domain for one entity, considering that other entity might also need in future, but build domain by domain per entity, per organization, and then scale it. Of course, there has to be a centralized team who is the owner of that. So they will come to know, hey, first entity needed sales or product, whatever it is. We created this graph thingy. And now another entity has come, want to use the same thing. You take it one level up, keep bringing other entities into it, domain by domain. Am I on the right track? Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So we are 3 minutes on top. Thank you, guys. Tim, especially for you, we need a feedback from you because this session was for you. Did you get enough out of it? Will this help you?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jenny. Pleasure to have this session. I think we should have more of these sessions. I got another guy, Jarek. He is also on graphs. Maybe we can have another session in a couple of months. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Mustafa. Have a nice day.
You too, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.